Okay, let's start.
Yeah.
Oh,
Minister.
colleague, Minister of State for Gender. Oh, you are not. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, done.
We are done. Colleague, Minister of State for Gender. The PS, Minister of Gender, Labour and Social Development. Workers' representatives here present. Employers' representatives. Distinguished members of the press. We converge here this afternoon to brief you on socio-economic effects of COVID-19 pandemic in Uganda, and more specifically on the employment relationship. Further to, and in support of the statement of His Excellency the President of the Republic of Uganda on the 18th March 2020 on COVID-19, and the guidance from the Ministry of Health on the same subject, I would like to reiterate that the virus is dangerous, and therefore the guidance given above should be adhered to by all workers and all employers in this country. World over, COVID-19 has been noted to be having far-reaching impacts on labor market outcomes. Beyond the urgent concerns about the health of workers and their families, the virus and the subsequent economic shocks will impact the world of work across three key dimensions. The first one is the quantity of jobs, both unemployment and employment. And we shall elaborate on that. Two, the quality of work, e.g., wages, access to social protection, and observance of the rights of workers. Three, effects on specific groups who are more vulnerable to adverse labor market outcomes, groups like the youth, women, children, persons with disabilities, unprotected workers, migrant workers, among others. The effects of COVID-19 have already been felt in the tourism, transport, and industrial or manufacturing sectors. The effect on other sectors is also anticipated. We know that employers are beginning to be constrained with matters related to maintenance of the workforce, and labor productivity. I would advise that COVID-19 pandemic should not disrupt the employment agreements, leave, and overall employer-employee relationships. Similarly, the threats related to layoffs or termination of workers and reduction in productivity levels, among others, have been noted, but all parties are advised to endeavor to follow the procedures enlisted in the Employment Act 2006 for any measures to be undertaken. Such measures should be undertaken after consultation with the ministry. And on a happy note, I wish to point out that we have had a very fruitful meeting with all key players. In the labor movement, we believe in working as a tripartite in a threesome setup with the government, who oversee the sector and regulate it. Workers' representatives or labor unions who represent workers, talk for them, negotiate for them. Then, of course, the employers who employ the workers. That's what we call the tripartite. Now, we have had very fruitful discussions as a tripartite and agreed on the formative steps we shall take in addressing this pandemic and ensuring that work is not disrupted while the rights of workers or employees are being observed and respected. I want to draw your attention and the attention of all employers, workers, and the general public to the following guidelines and considerations which we have agreed upon as a tripartite as we look forward to mitigating the effects of COVID-19 on employment in Uganda. 1. Employers should endeavor to retain the employees who are on monthly pay, since termination at this stage may become costly in terms of payment of terminal benefits, such as severance pay, repatriation pay, payment in lieu of notice, payment in lieu of leave, compulsory compensation, or any other damages to the worker. Because there is a law and there are employment agreements which were signed between the employers and the employees, and collective bargaining agreements signed between employers and the unions. So those have provisions which, though this pandemic was unexpected, should be to a high extent observed and respected. 2, the engagement of the employees who are still under casual terms may be reviewed, and some of them can be advised to stay home. 3, employees should be encouraged to take pending annual leave or leave without pay upon agreement with the employers where it is deemed necessary that workforce must be reduced. 4, in the case of unionized workers, the parties should explore the provisions of the collective bargaining agreement in case layoffs and redundancies become the best option. In doing this, they must observe requirements under Section 40, subsection 3A, and Section 84 of the Employment Act 2006. To clarify on that, as I said earlier, for unionized workers, the relationship between the workers and the employers are negotiated and agreed upon between the employers and the labor unions, and they come up with what we call a collective bargaining agreement. It has terms that cover all the workers under the specific unions. So those provisions of those agreements and of the law must be adhered to while addressing this pandemic. Of course, need may arise to revisit some of the provisions of the agreements, as the case may be, and where that happens, this ministry and the Commissioner for Labor are at hand to guide, preside over, and assist in concluding mutually acceptable agreements. Five, employers should provide training of workers on preventive measures for COVID-19, should provide personnel, protective equipment, and treatment of affected workers in line with Part 3 of the Occupational Safety and Health Act 2006. 6, we have henceforth suspended labor externalization for 32 days from the 18th March 2020. And when I talk of stopping labor externalization, we mean the process whereby Ugandan workers are transported from Uganda to the recipient countries to undertake work. This has to be suspended because when they are going through the airport, there is congestion. That congestion contravenes the regulation that there should not be a gathering of more than 10 people. That's one. Two, even where they are going in the respective countries, because of this pandemic, those countries have closed their borders and they may not be allowed. So it's necessary to have a suspension for the period which was decreed by the president. However, this suspension will not stop the processes that have been taking place and are ongoing. Processes like processing passports, securing clearances from Interpol and whoever will continue, because we have to prepare ourselves for the eventuality of this pandemic ending, because we know the recipient countries still will need labor force after the pandemic, and our people are anxious to go and work abroad. I hope I'm clear enough that what we are suspending is only transportation of human beings from Uganda. The other aspect which we cannot suspend is receiving workers who have been working abroad. We hear some of the countries which have been affected by the pandemic are repatriating Ugandans because there is no work in those countries. Most of the Ugandans are employed in hotels, airports, and in areas that require unskilled and semi-skilled labor. Because of the pandemic, since people are not traveling, for example, in hotels, in airports, those countries find that they don't have work. So if they don't have work, why do they keep Ugandans? We hear they are repatriating them in mass. They will come back, but when they arrive, they will be treated in accordance with the regulations that we have put in place. Number 7. Meanwhile, all labor migrant workers returning, I've already said this, from high-risk countries shall be subjected to terms and conditions set by the Ministry of Health and decreed by the President, that is taking mandatory quarantine for 14 days. 8. In the meantime, our ministry will continue to perform other assignments required for the externalization of labor, although, as I said, no one will be cleared to travel abroad during this period. 9. During the period of suspension of externalization of labor, we will closely monitor the situation in liaison with the embassies of the destination countries, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as our diplomatic representation abroad. Should layoff of employees not be avoided, for the employees and employers in the country, should layoffs not be avoided, the following procedures shall be applied. And these are procedures we have agreed upon as stakeholders. 1. All affected employees should be given notice in accordance with the provisions of under Section 58 and 81 of the Employment Act. That law stipulates for notice of between 7 and 30 days. Where, 90 days, yes. 7 days and 90 days. And each case will depend on its own merits to determine the length of notice to be given. 2. The processes should have a humane face and should clearly be in writing and be signed in form of agreements between the parties, and the time frame should be stipulated. Of course, we are not certain of what will happen after the 30 days, but we shall all be watching the situation. But nevertheless, the agreements should be time-bound, but could be reviewed when need arises. 4, any temporary layoff should not break the continuous service of an employee as required by Section 84 of the Employment Act 2006. There are rights that accrue to an employee when he is continuously employed and he has worked for an institution for some period of time. Now, employers should not use this excuse to summarily terminate the employment of the employees without taking regard of their obligations under the agreement and under the law. 5, there should be commitment that workers should be re-engaged when work normalizes. That's very, very important. We don't want employers to use the excuse of this pandemic to lay off workers when they have no reason to do so. Number 6, terminal benefits that accrue should be paid when an employer decides to terminate the employment relationship unless otherwise agreed. Because this situation occurred without notice to any parties, you may find it necessary for the worker to negotiate with the employer regarding his terminal benefits. And once they agree, that is sorted. I urge all of the experts to provide continuous information and sensitization of workers and the general public on the preventive measures of COVID-19. This is the only way the anxiety, the fear, and the effects of the pandemic will be well managed. As I conclude, I wish to thank His Excellency the President of the Republic of Uganda for his guidance and for the measures communicated to the nation, which will go a long way to preserve the workforce and maintain the productivity which is required to begin work after normalization of this bad situation. I also thank the Minister of Health for the continued guidance on preventive measures toward the employers, workers, and the entire population. I want to thank my colleagues, the minister here, ministers of state, the PS, technical staff, for the guidance they have given to our workforce and to the entire nation regarding the relationships between the employer and the employee in such a bad situation. The ministry will continue to support the workers and employers on matters related to employment relationships during the period of the implementation of the measures for prevention of COVID-19. As of now, the future is still uncertain. New situations may emerge. It's our commitment that as a ministry in charge of labor, in charge of industrial relations, we shall remain open on a daily basis to receive whatever new occurrences that may arise, so that we put our heads together as a tripartite and as a government to resolve related issues of workers. For God and my country, this is the end of the statement. My colleague, the minister in charge of gender, may have something to add. Then we accept some few questions and we close the conference.
As a minister responsible for not only labor but also gender and culture, we have a few things to add. And one is that we want to encourage communities living around the border, since we know we have the coronavirus spread. We also want to encourage the herbalists and traditional healers and advise that they refer all cases with signs of coronavirus to known government health facilities for management, because we know 60% of the drugs we use in Uganda from our traditional healers and herbalists. But for this particular case, it is the new strain of a virus that we had not researched about at all. So we want to encourage the herbalists and traditional healers not to risk with patients that will have such symptoms. Ensure that they go to health facilities, government health facilities specifically, for further management. And also the remand homes and children homes of the either children living destitutes should operate under strong observance of the standard operating procedures as stipulated by the Ministry of Health. And we want to encourage very strict hygiene within our communities. Yes, we have been encouraged to wash our hands as often as possible, but should not be limited only hands. Our bodies should be very clean, and our clothes should be changed almost every day, so that we are sure our journey towards ending the fight against coronavirus is shorter. And this can only be done if communities are really able to cooperate with these guidelines and with advice from the Ministry of Health. So we want to encourage members of the community to remain calm, but also be very strict and observe all the guidelines that we have. We have a tendency of keeping on alert for quite a short time. Once we don't feel anything happening, we revert back to our normal processes and orders. So we are not differing from our normal culture, norms, and practices, but we want to be very sure that our communities are protected enough. So the idea of hugging and greeting by hands, let's try to avoid them for now, and also observe a distance while we are communicating and not congregate in a manner that we have been congregating. This is not business as usual. I want to thank you so much for taking time off to capture this information.
Okay, members of the press, any questions now? If there are no questions, then we go. Okay. Name and media
My
house.
name is Simon Christmas and I'm from SG. I've not heard you talk about companies that employ more than 300 people. What should they do?
Okay. Any other question? I guess that's it, Honorable Minister.
Okay.
There is one.
Okay.
Another.
Who?
Namugabe Eva from Radio 1.
If we are going to do what?
Affected in terms of closure. Okay. If there will be any public office closed during these 32 days. Any other question?
Okay. Simon Makanga, you have said, and rightly so, that we have not talked about companies that employ more than 300 people. We addressed our mind to that. We agreed that as we put these guidelines in place and as we implement them, as much as possible, work should go ahead. Because we need to produce, people need to earn, and people need to have something to use in their daily lives. However, our guidance to all those companies is to ensure that the guidelines must prevail as they work. For example, if you have a gathering of, if you have a workforce of 300 people, don't hold a meeting of more than 10. Be creative. If a meeting is required or necessary, find a way of apportioning the meeting so that the gathering is not more than 10. That's one. Two, have the standard operation SOPs. What are they? Standard operating procedures. Make sure you have several places where people can wash hands. Make sure whatever you do, the distance between individuals, the social distance between individuals is as stipulated in the guidelines. Is it 1 meter? 2 meters apart. Actually, I'm sorry to say that now we are breaching the guidelines. But this is the last time because we have to communicate our decisions. If we put in place those measures, as of now, it is a hope that we shall keep the virus away.
The honorable minister, they can also work on shifts.
Yeah.
They can work on shifts. The most important thing is to ensure that there is no congestion, a gathering that has more people than the prescribed number of 10. Now, Namugav Eva, are there any government offices that will be affected by these measures? I think the answer is, as I said, in government offices here, like in our ministry, we have put in place those standard operating ideas. If you didn't wash hands before you entered here, they know that somebody must have defaulted on his work. Washing hands, not congesting, making sure that the social distance is 2 meters and above. If we apply that, we think government offices should continue running. We have not yet anticipated which government office should close. But if the situation demands, we shall revisit our guidelines and improve on them to make sure that the security of our workforce is safe.
That's it. I guess we go into Uganda.
Sure.
Ndi musajja wa Kabaka nja kulwogera. Apparently there is none. So thank you very much. I wish you concentrated protection. I wish you publicize only correct and researched information so that we avoid the panic, we avoid the stampede, we avoid the untruthful, the lies that are now causing a lot of panic and destabilization to our society. We have had cases where people just report, oh, a case of coronavirus has been identified here. When we find that it is a hoax. Please avoid those, because in this era, in these circumstances, we don't need our people to live in panic. When there is panic, we shall lose the fight. If we remain steadfast, we shall win, and the virus will not enter here. What I didn't say is that as of now, though all our neighbors are affected, in Uganda, God has still guided us. We have not registered any case of coronavirus. So thank you so much.